This is me and Sally again. We're back to write more software together. We're back to do more work together. And in this session, Sally, I remember last time you and I were talking, we had a quick assignment. Do you remember what it was? By any chance?
Instantiate the logging broker.
The login
Make
broker. Hmm.
them make sure the test pass. So it doesn't provide
Yes.
a as soon as we call
Hmm.
it in a book service. So
Hmm.
because it was needed several parameters, so it will cause problem. So
That's right. And it looks
I
like you made it work. Look at that. Tell me, what did you do? Uh-huh.
yes, there was some changes in program I have to provide.
Uh-huh.
So in the program you wrote down three line that I couldn't recall what was it. Basically,
Uh-huh.
you call the book service there, and here book service test. So or book service, it got two parameter over there. I didn't realize you put it there. Then
Hmm.
I uncomment them, so it run well. But we can go back to program.cs under
Programs,
and
yes. This guy here. Yep. Yep.
yeah.
Ah,
So
because of the dependencies and all that. That's right. That's right.
so
Uh-huh.
for the book service here, so it has a storage broker. I wanted to add iLogger, and then so basically I provide another where like login broker, kind of
Uh-huh.
make a new. So it
But
didn't
it won't
work.
work because you still need to pass in the iLogger. And I'll explain these to you. There's something that gets
But then
registered in the system.
I
Uh-huh.
how do I pass the input to the storage broker is empty, but
Uh,
for iLogger I have to add something. So
right. And
but
how I go ahead. Go ahead. Hmm.
didn't I fell in that part. So and I uncomment them so everything works fine. So and
Okay.
I couldn't recall why we add those.
Oh, these are just like instantiations. We're just instantiating. Let me show you how I would go about doing that. Let's see if I can actually create a logger. So that's a logging broker, right? And this logging broker wants something. It wants a logger. If you go and say
Oh,
logger,
this is the part I fell. Okay.
that's okay. That's all right. So this is a logger, right? And then you basically want to say, oh, I want to log for something, whatever the logging factory that I want to work with, right? And I think there's something called logger factory extensions, something like that.
Mm.
Let's see, logger like this, and then I can go and say I logging broker like this. This is how I used to do it, before. And then does this guy take in and then provide? Usually ASP.NET will do that work for you, right? But what I'm looking for is something like called Logger Factory. This guy here, and this guy. There you go. So you can get the like. And I'm just letting you know you're not expected to know that stuff, right? We're still trying to learn together, so you're not expected to actually know what the heck this is. But this is your Logger Factory, right? And then this logger factory basically will create a logger for you. So logger, and then this is logger factory, something that we call factory pattern. And then this will create a logger for me like this. And now I have this logger. Now what does this guy return? It returns an iLogger, right? And this guy takes in a category name. I don't know, whatever. I can add in here whatever category name for now. And then I can go and take that logger and just pass it in the logging broker.
No, yeah,
And
that's the
now,
part.
yep, and then I can pass
Yeah,
in that logging broker to the service, and now it's all good and dandy.
okay, yeah, that's the part I didn't know how to
Not a
create
problem.
station from login bro.
Not even a problem. Okay, so
It's
here's
good now.
here it's fine. So here's what I want you to know though. When you add a dependency like this, a new dependency, you already did the hard work. You basically went in and said, okay, let me instantiate a mock and then let me instantiate that mock in here and let me pass that mock in there, right? But we have other tests in here. We have add, we have modify, we have all of these. Here's the thing,
Mhm,
and this is really what I want you to know today, is that wherever you write a test, you should ensure that all of your
yeah.
dependencies are verified that there have been no other calls for them. Do you know why? Because nobody should be able to sneak in a call to a dependency in your service without your knowledge. Why is that important? So nobody could modify your logic without you knowing. Let me tell you why is that important. So let's say, for instance, in here, this guy here doesn't verify that the logging broker have not been called other than what has been already verified, right? That means I can go up in here and I can go and change the code. I can go like this and say logging broker dot log error and new exception in here. I'm going to throw a new exception. I'm going to say, oh my God, everything is burning.
Mhm.
But watch this. Watch this. If I go and run all the tests like this, watch. Nothing happened. Nothing broke. What do you think about that?
Mhm.
That's really bad, right? Why is that bad? Because that basically means anybody could go into your system. Your system is exposed. It's not protected, right? Your logic is not protected. So how do we prevent that from happening? If I go in the add logic in here and say, hey, by the way, also verify that no other calls have happened within the execution of this service to the logging broker. Now watch what happens. If I go and run this right now, watch this. It'll freak out. Watch. Come on, freak out. You can do it. See? So what is it saying? He said mock failed verification due to the following unverified invocations. Look at this. He said, hey, hold on a second. You said, oh my God, everything is burning, but you didn't really tell me here that this is supposed to happen. So,
Mhm.
so that's why this verify no other calls is very, 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 very important. Okay, so that means anybody can just go in. So now I'll be like, oh my God, I broke the test. I'm not supposed to do that. So let me take that out and let me run all the tests again. And now all of the sudden, everything should pass because I haven't violated the rules where no other calls should have been made to that dependency. Why is that important, Sally? Because anybody could take advantage of your code and go and say, okay, this code is not protected and nobody's looking. Like this is a simple system that we're looking at. I'm talking here about a multi-million lines of code system, right? Multi-million lines of code system that is running out there. And, think about these files in the thousands, right? Thousands and thousands of files, right? What that means is that you're going to have people coming in and out of your project all the time, right? And the people that might come in and out of your project all the time may or may not know much or less or none of the engineering standard. What these people are going to be doing is that they're going to go out there and say, you know what, I have a bug that I need to fix. Let me just fix that bug by just adding this additional logging in here without having to test drive that change. So without having to write a failing test first and then making it pass, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go out there and basically just change the code because I don't know the standard. I don't know the best practices. I'm just going to go do and do that. If nothing in the system tells him, heck no, you can't do that, they will just continue to do that. And that's where starts. Like your code base starts becoming more and more crappy because people are coming in, changing your code, getting away with it without your unit tests are basically complaining and saying, no, you can't do that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And the more critical, think about it. Okay, the Apollo mission, right? When people landed on the moon and all that kind of stuff, right? That was thousands and thousands of lines of code that were running this operation. Computers that are making calculation every single step of the way, right? Imagine if this code base at any point in time, this is millions of lines of code, right? Sometimes code can do things very critical. They can be life-threatening. They can save people's lives or can, destroy people's lives, right? Computers are running everything today.
Mhm.
If your code base is not protected with unit tests, it's very, very likely that someone is going to make a dummy change. And if your unit tests are preventing him, telling him, sorry, you can't do that, they can actually literally endanger someone's life. I worked in places where we were building compressors, and these compressors basically get plugged into oil stations, like the stations that are in the middle of the ocean to basically bump oil from the middle of the ocean, right? And these compressors were basically responsible for making sure to shut down the turbo engines if it reaches a certain level of heat. Like if the engine overheats, it needs to stop that engine immediately. right? How does it detect that? It had this compressor that had a sensor, and that sensor would detect basically the temperature, right? If the code that is handling that is not test driven and someone went in and said, oh, you know what, let's make the temperature up to 500 degrees instead of 120 or 300, everybody dies. Everybody on that ship dies, right? So this is where, you know, while we're building something simple like a simple library like this, you know, we're saying, oh, this is Sally library, it's a simple API. At some point in time, you'll be writing code that has a much greater purpose and much more critical purpose. And this is where things come in very, very important and very, very handy. Test driven. This is the purpose of test driven development. Okay. So take note, first thing you're gonna need to do, this first assignment, is that we need to ensure that all our dependencies, we're gonna need to verify no other calls have happened to any of these dependencies. Are we clear on that one? Any
Yes.
questions here? Okay, so that's that first part. Okay, what's the second part that we need to do? Why do we need logging anyway? Logging, Sally, will help us verify that we have logged in. You know, we're already through the exception, but that exception for the consumer of the service. The engineers are going to need more details than that. The engineers are going to need more details than that. We use logging to basically communicate to the engineers that are maintaining the project how critical this is, what are all the details that we need to learn about this operation, and all the other details that we need to kind of handle an issue. Okay, so what that means is that we need every time we throw an exception to log that exception. We need to log that exception and determine the criticality of that exception, right? What that basically means is that I can go up in here in any of these exceptions, and I can go up in here and modify things a little bit. I can go here and say, okay, if a service exception occurs, I want to make sure that this service exception is logged, it and its inner dependency. How do we do that? Now check this out. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, and I want you to bear with me on this one because this one is really, really important piece in our system. I'm gonna fix the screening here just so you can have the. Okay, so here's the deal. We need to be able to go and say, we're gonna throw this part away. I'm gonna go here and just say verify that the exception has happened. Bear with me on this one because you're gonna need to make those changes across all. And I'm gonna take this one out. See, I'm basically simplifying the things that we used to do before. We're gonna simplify these things a little bit. And then in here, my friend, I'm gonna be basically going and saying I need to verify that the exception that's happening in here is the same exception. Do you see this part where it says same exception as in here? Remember that guy? We're gonna use that guy again, but we're gonna use it for something a lot more interesting, and we're gonna change the way it's structured a little bit. I'm gonna use an expression. This is an expression, and that expression takes in a func that basically takes in an exception and returns a Boolean, meaning that I'm gonna go and say take in an exception as an input parameter and return a Boolean whether that input parameter is equivalent or not. So I'm gonna go here and say, check this out. I'm gonna go and say this is instead of this return, I'm gonna say return actual exception. And here's my fat arrow in here. So I'm basically saying actual exception dot message should be equivalent to expected exception dot message. And actual exception dot inner message should be expected to inner exception dot inner message. And then I'm gonna add something on top of that where I go and say, well, also actual exception dot inner exception, watch this, as exception, watch this, as exception. Did I not pull this library in yet? I thought I did. Okay, we'll do that in the next session. For now, let's just do same exception as, and then I'm gonna go back to this here, and I'm gonna go and say, okay, when we throw an exception, bear with me very well on this one. I'm gonna go and say, okay, when this exception happens, let's go up in here and say logging broker mock verify. Watch this, verify that this broker in here has logged an error out of this exception. And this exception should be, it is like this. What's happening? There it is. It is same exception as the expected exception that I built, and that should be called times once. I'll explain to you all of this in a second. So that means that this logging broker have actually been called at least once, and I'm verifying that this logging broker has not been called any other time before that. Watch this again. I basically went in and said, you know that expected exception? I want to verify that the logging broker have received that exact same value of exceptions that I expect it to have. They will have a failed service exception with inner exception inside of it. This guy should fail, but also other things should break because I changed the signature of this method. So I'm going to copy this method here and I'm going to revert real quick because other things are relying on that. And I'm going to just call this for name same exception as X, so I don't break existing code because there's other code that we wrote here that basically handles these exceptions, right? I think, is this the only place where we did exceptions? Oh, really? That's great. Actually, then I can do that then. Okay, sounds good. Then I can do that. This is same exception as, like this. And then let me just make sure everything is building. And where is that? Oh, this is in the, oh, we are using it in other places, in a lot of other places. Okay, okay. I'm gonna comment that and let you kind of fix it, as an assignment. But just bear with me on the, I'm gonna comment all of that and let you kind of think about fixing this issue.
Oh, because for modifying we
Because
didn't
we
go.
modified the signature of it. Now it's not the same as what it used to be. Okay, so I'm gonna rebuild that real quick. Okay, so building succeed. Now I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna say, so let me just, make sure you understand this part because this is really important. I'm basically saying when my service is being called and a service exception happens, this service exception will be thrown when I call this service. You see how I assign this action to this service? I'm basically going to throw this exception when this call happens and then verify the storage broker has been called once, but also verify that the logging broker have logged an exception of the exact same features and exact same details as this one. Are you with me?
I'm thinking, yeah. Why this exception? Okay.
This one here? I'm basically saying this service should throw an exception of type, book service exception that has failed exception inside of it.
That's why you call it, you call log error rather than log critical, for example.
Yes, there will be log critical. In this one, it will be error because it's not critical. It's not something that happens across the board, not that we know of.
Okay.
It's just an error. It's not critical. So if I run this test here, it should fail. I'm going to show you how I make it pass. Check this out.
I have to call that extra. Okay.
This test now is going to go and say, wait a second, you were supposed to log that exception, but you haven't. Look at this. It will say, I expected you to invoke this log error with the exception once, but you haven't. So now check this out. I can go up in here and commit this in here as a failing test, like this. Watch this. Fail. And now, my friend, I can go into add book and I can go and say, when this service exception happens, before you throw this exception, let me take that exception in here. This is my book service exception. Watch this, like this. So before you throw that exception, let me do this. Let me make my code a little bit pretty. And then I'm gonna go here and say this .logging broker .log error with that book service exception. So this exception that happened, I want to log it before I throw that exception. See what I just did there? Do you think that would make the test pass? I don't know. Let's find out. Look, it passed.
Yeah.
Because I fulfilled the requirement. The requirement here was to make sure that I'm going to call this dependency and log all the details about what happened to that exception before I throw it. So I threw the exception and I made the call, and then I'm making sure that I log that exception.
Right.
Can you guess what your assignment is?
We
You have to,
accept exception.
Right. So you have two assignments today, my friend. Two things. Number one, you want to make sure that we verify no other calls have happened to any other dependency, period. Number one, no other calls have happened. So any test that we have here, you're going to need to go and add this logging broker, verify no other calls to it.
Mhm.
That's number one. Okay. That's number one thing. Number two, wherever we throw exceptions, we need to log it. So any of your validation tests in here, see how we structured these tests? We're going to change that. But what's going to happen is that this guy's going to go away like this. This guy's going to completely go away. And then we're going to have to go here and say this dot logging broker mock dot, verify, verify, and then broker, like this, verify. And then broker, here you go, broker dot log error, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense to you?
Right.
All the stuff that we just did.
And the only question I have, like, how would I distinguish this is critical or like this is
That's
I
a
mean,
great question.
uh, I
For now,
can
for
cheat from the triple.
yes, that's $1 million. It's literally $1 million question. I'll tell you why it's $1 million question. Because if you don't properly categorize the errors that happen in your system, you might actually decide to log something as warning when it's actually critical, and you're gonna lose $1 million in one of these big enterprise applications. This is why this is $1 million question. That would be the next session. We're gonna talk a little bit more in depth. For now, any exception that is being thrown, we're just gonna call it as error. That's it.
Okay.
That's all that
Or
it
I can
is.
look at the triple A. So
You
I
can
can
look at you can look at OSSS, you can look at OSSS, and you can basically look at most of these. And just like I said, make sure, next time, maybe next time or the time after that, because now I'm reaching the end of building foundation services with you. What you know today, what you have, today, and what you have done with me today is basically you're basically time traveling. You're basically skipping years and years of trials and errors that I've had in the software industry to be able to figure out, my head from my tail, right? So what you know today as it stands, that basically puts you up there with a bunch of engineers that can build enterprise application for multi-million, multi-billion dollar businesses. We are just really, really close to adding a couple of more things in here. And once these things are done, you, my friend, are ready to kind of be onboarded and start contributing directly to some of the, popular open source projects. Start have your Git file profile. You'll be able to kind of all your contribution, all the code that you write in, whether you're
yes.
doing it for training, whether you're doing it for fun, it will all go into that profile. It will stay there forever. And you will
Great.
always be able to go and tell people, yes, I have the experience. I am a coder level, I'm a developer level, I'm at a programmer level, whatever the case may be. Okay, friend, cool.
So excited for this.
Sally, as usual, it's always fun talking to you. It's always, fun to kind of re-examine, my assumptions. Just like I was telling Ricardo before this session, he's a new guy that's working with me. I was just telling him, I get out of this as much as the people that I work with. You help me re-examine my assumptions by asking me questions. And basically are taking in this new patterns and new standards and trying to kind of digest it. Every single feedback that I get is really important and it gets incorporated into that system. Does that make sense?
Thank
So
you.
thank you. Thank you again. And I look forward to connecting with you tomorrow. Okay,
Yes,
friend?
yeah,
Cool.
have fun.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care, Sally. Bye. Bye.